one of the best habits that I can recommend to you is just getting outside more. If you go outside regularly, at least 20 minutes a day, you get at least 10 benefits for your body, your physical body. But then I also think there's a spiritual benefit to going outside regularly. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the spiritual benefits of getting outside and why you should try to go outside every day for quite a long time. Hope you'll join me. Welcome to a More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. We know that in the hectic hurry of everyday life, it's easy to lose sight of what really matters. This is a moment to pause and realign your focus on the one who gives us peace and rest. We're focusing on discipleship, productivity, and homemaking as we live with eternity in mind. This is the place where you'll learn to create a life you love and cultivate your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher. Thanks so much for joining me. Hey everyone, this is episode 37 of season 1 of a More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad that we get to talk about this topic today, because this is something that, yes, it hasn't really necessarily been something that we have focused on in the past in a previous episode, but it's one that really has changed my whole lifestyle. And this habit is getting outside more. So as we've been thinking about different habits we can include in our lives, we've been thinking about this in the context of our rule of life. So how do we want to structure our days in order to glorify God with the time that we have and steward our time well? And so one of the habits that we are talking about today is just getting outside. And what we're going to see is, I think that God has created us to get outside, and to specifically to get outside every day for long periods of time. It's what we were made for. And really, we haven't had to be reminded of this except in the past, 50 to 100 years or so, because before then, even before like the 1950s and 60s, really people just lived outside. And so we're going to see kind of why this is something that is a specifically modern problem, and we as modern people need to be reminded of. And then also we're going to look at some benefits from nature, benefits for getting outside, and looking specifically to it, how getting outside and getting outside into nature can even be a spiritual practice. It can be a form of a spiritual discipline. And so as we think about this, the first thing that I want to do is I want to read you this verse. And it says in Psalm 19:1, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands." So as we think about all the things that we're going to talk about today, I want you to kind of have this verse in the back of your mind that, yes, we're going to look at some physical benefits of being outside in nature. And we're also going to think about some tips and tricks for how to get outside more, no matter what your lifestyle is. But at the root of it all, we have this idea that really, whenever we get outside, we are seeing the works of God. We're seeing his creation, and that reminds us of him. And so that really is the basic truth of our podcast today, is that we're just thinking about how we can be confronted more with God, because I think there are some issues with the modern lifestyle where we don't have this. And because of that, we think that we sometimes know better than God, but it's just because we're not confronted with the work that he does. So what we're going to be doing today, like I said, is we are going to be talking about getting outside more. Now, to go along with this, if you check out the show notes, you can subscribe and you'll get a free copy of my time outside tracker. So it's like a habit tracker. There's one for the year where you can just mark, have you been outside today? There's also a monthly tracker. So if you're one of those people that tracks their hours, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, you can also get that, and you can track your hours with your time outside. Again, what we are moving towards after we finish looking at some of our habits, I think we'll do this for a few more episodes, is over the summer, we're going to be doing a What You Believe series. And so we're leading up to that in the summertime. And again, you can check out the shop that have our Bible studies. The second month of our morning menus is out now, and the second month is going to be all about contemplation. So our first month of our morning time menus, if you don't know what that is, it's just a morning time practice. So basically it goes along with your quiet time, but it's not just your Bible reading. Instead, it fleshes out your whole morning time. So there's scripture memory, there is some book recommendations, There is some a prayer log that you can use. And so really it just fleshes out your morning time practice so that you are, not just, trying to amass knowledge. You're also practicing some of these other spiritual disciplines and adding in some learning to your day. So trying to work in that habit of reading. So you can check that out. Again, the second month is all about contemplation and specifically looking at some contemplative habits that you can add to your life that can help you to turn your focus on God, both during your morning time and also throughout the day. So you can check that out on the shop at amblshop@amorebeautifullifecollective.com. So what we are going to be focusing on, as I've already mentioned, is this idea of getting outside. So what got me thinking about the topic for today's podcast is I was looking at a couple posts on Facebook and Instagram, and I saw this picture, and you may have seen it too. Basically, it's like the evolution of man. And so, it always starts out with this like caveman, and he's kind of hunched over. And then as he, as time goes on, he kind of straightens up, and you probably have seen this. But in this particular version of this photo, as we get closer to the modern man, he gets hunched back over. He actually has a rake, and that's what first gets him hunched back over. And then he has another kind of tool, kind of like a hand drill. And then he gets hunched over his computer where he is completely seated. And then the last part of the picture is him being completely hunched over his phone as he looks and he screens at his screen. And so you could kind of see how, there's this evolution of man where, we're getting to this point where he's tall and he's like fully evolved, but then we're kind of devolving as you have certain types of technology in it. And obviously, this picture has a certain bias against technology. But like we've talked about, technology, it can cause a lot of issues. We talked about this in the last episode as we thought about digitally decluttering our lives. Yes, it's important that we use technology, use the best of technology to connect with other people, spread our ideas, listen to things like this, listen to podcasts, learn and grow. But also there's so much baggage with technology that it really requires some discernment as we use it. But thinking about this, we have this issue of technology use. And so as you declutter technology from your life, there's often a hole that is made whenever you take out some of the bad. And so in this hole, you have to replace it with something good. Replace it with something that is going to cultivate goodness in you and cultivate your heart for God. And so I think a lot of people, as they try to remove things from their life, like they try to remove screens, they do. And they're like, well, what's the point? I'm bored now. Like, why is this even good for me? Like they kind of get antsy and then they don't like that feeling. And so then they end up just replacing that time either with some other hobby or they go back to wasting it with social media or something like that. And so I think what we need to think about is how we can fill this time and fill it wisely. If you remove some time off of screens, if you're trying to limit your screen time and try to be purposeful with the time that you have, how can you cultivate a time that directs your heart to God? What's interesting about this picture is that really, obviously it's making like a point and it's very pointed in the picture that it has of us kind of devolving back into, this kind of ape-like man that's hunched over a screen. But what's interesting is actually there is a thing that they've called that your spine, as you look at a screen, it does change the curvature of your spine. And they actually call it tech neck. That's what chiropractors call it. It's TECH, neck. And what they say is that it actually changes the distribution of your body weight. So or lowering your head 60 degrees puts about 60 more pounds on your spine. And so again, it changes that curvature. And so what's interesting is it's a digital age posture that is changing the way that we look. And obviously, if you change the curvature of your spine, might have chronic neck and back pain. You might have an increased risk of spinal degeneration, and you also might have impaired respiratory function. As a singer, I was in chorus, and I've also sang in other areas, and so they always talked about how you needed to make sure you have really good posture and a really straight back so that you can, get a full breath in your diaphragm. And so even now I can kind of feel that, where it feels different if I'm sitting up straight versus kind of hunched over. And you probably can hear me better if I'm hunched over, where I'm closer to the mic. But you can kind of take a moment now, and you could do this too, where you straighten up your spine and you get that full breath of air instead of being hunched over, looking at a screen or whatever you're doing. And I think the reason why I bring this up is you can kind of tell how, technology and devices, it changes the very way that we posture ourselves, where we are looking down and looking into these devices. And it's to the detriment of our bodies. Like, our bodies are not as functional because we are doing these things. So what's interesting then is, okay, well, this is the problem. And I talked about this problem last week on the episode. So what is the solution? If this is the hole created by technology, or if this is the problem created by technology, what is the solution then? And I think that the thing that is our solution is, one, you can go no screens or low screens. But obviously, I don't think that's sustainable for your whole day. I think there's going to be some use of technology. But I think the other thing that can be the solution, that can be a more lasting change, is to just practice regularly getting outside. And we're going to talk about why this is in just a little bit, but I think it really will change the way that you approach one, things like your posture and, your relationship with screens, but I think it will change every other part of your life. This point has been made, the point that I'm about to say, it's been made so much that it's almost become cliche, but I think it's worth repeating that, we're living in this society that man has never lived in before. Modern society is very much a man-made creation. And it's something that we're really not equipped to handle. It's interesting. You could talk about, that, if you don't believe in evolution, that we haven't evolved to this state, that we were created. But even if God created us in the past, think about what he created us for. I firmly believe that God, he created us for that garden. In that garden, nowhere it was mentioned that it was made with buildings and, climate control or anything like that. Yes, it was perfect. And so you could talk about maybe the weather being perfect. And yes, there were no weeds. There were no dangerous animals, maybe no insects. I don't know. But we were created for outdoor living. And so the reason why I think this is important is I think we've forgotten this. Society, it has developed so much in the past 100 to 150 years of increased specialization, living inside, climate control, looking at some of the toxins in our food based on, chemical changes in our food and our medicine and the different types of materials that we use. All of these things are affecting us. And a lot of times we don't even know how they're affecting us because the changes have happened so rapidly that we haven't really even been able to take stock of the changes. That's why I think with technology, we're really only starting to see the effects of technology, especially things like social media and their effects on our brains now. And so you're just having this first generation. But I mean, social media has only been around, really, it's been since 2008, but where we've used it, so ubiquitously, has really only been since, 2012, 2013, as iPhones became so commonplace. And so that's only really, 15 years. And so I think it's important to recognize that we have not been able to think through the implications of these things. Again, and you might not like the phrasing that we haven't evolved to this, but even if you take that away, we haven't been able to ethically go through, what boundaries we should place. We haven't really been able to set the rhythms and routines in our lives because so many of us have just abandoned the way that they did things 100 years ago because we think, oh, well, they don't know what they're talking about. We're going to do the modern thing. So yeah, they had to be outside because they didn't have air conditioning, but we have air conditioning now. So why wouldn't I use it? And we don't think about how maybe we're changing something that shouldn't be changed, that maybe we were actually made to get outside, but whenever we stay inside, we could actually be harming ourselves. And so I really think that is something that you need to think about what you believe about this. If we believe that God made us to be outside, made us for the garden, which was outside, then if you're not regularly trying to get outside, how are you living? Like, how does that show your beliefs? Recently, there has been a movement where people have gone back to trying to learn some of these old-fashioned skills, things like growing your own herbs, taking care of livestock, even some of these old practices like beekeeping, basket weaving, all of these things that are things that we could do a lot faster with machines or with industrialized farming practices, but they're trying to get back to these old skills. And so I think we see in culture that there is this kind of yearning for some of these simple skills. At the same time, there's a big movement now, and I mentioned this podcast before, of the 1,000 Hours Outside podcast. But again, it's this idea of trying to have more outdoor living. And so with these two forces, the homesteading movement, the, trying to get outside movement, I think we see that society, there's a certain group of people that are trying to call people to get outside more. And so today, what I'm going to tell you is 10 benefits of nature, of getting outside. And then again, after this, we're going to look at another bonus benefit of the spiritual benefit of getting outside. So let's look at these 10 benefits of nature. So our first benefit of going outdoors is that it improves our eyesight. And the reason why is whenever we're inside, depending on the size of your house, you may have some things where you have to look a little bit further away, but you never actually work your vision where you are needing to see very far away. This is compounded by the fact that most of the time whenever we're inside, we're doing things like, looking at a screen. Some of us are reading books and or we're playing, with something, or something, is on a desk that we're working with. And so that will make us be nearsighted. I'm nearsighted, I need glasses. And they say that kids who spend a lot of time indoors looking at screens or reading books, they're especially things that have, they're kind of small details like letters or things inside that are very tiny that can make them be nearsighted. And so what you need to do is you need to get outside every day so you can train your vision to see far away. So it's important to get outside because one, it improves your eyesight. The second one is, again, it straightens your spine. Whenever you're outside, you're probably not looking, at a screen. You may read. I like to read books outside, but, hopefully you're also walking around, you're doing things. And so because of that, you're fighting those effects of tech neck whenever you are working outside. So whenever you get outside, you can practice good posture. I've heard it said that, basically the only time where we need to look up is whenever we're outside. And then we're looking up at the grandeur of creation. And I think there's this beautiful picture of us. Whenever we go outside, one, we become farsighted and things get put in perspective. We set our eyes on things above, but we also change our posture. So we go from being kind of slunched and kind of slouched over, and that's also kind of like an anxious or depressed posture. And then you straighten your posture out and you're looking up. So you're changing your whole perspective. And we'll talk about, again, the spiritual implications of that in just a minute. But I think that's a beautiful picture of what getting outside can do for you physically, literally in that moment, but also for your life as a whole. It changes your focus and it changes your posture. The next one is that it boosts happiness. And there's a lot of reasons why this happens. You could talk about, the reduction of stress from getting outside, but also in addition to that, there's some actual, physical chemical reactions that happen. Fresh air actually increases your oxygen levels in your brains, which raises serotonin levels, which is that happy hormone. And the same thing happens. Your serotonin levels actually go up whenever you are exposed to beneficial microorganisms in the soil. So that's why it's good to not always use, the antibacterial hand sanitizer. It's good to play in dirt, even as an adult, whether that's gardening or something else. Your brain also releases serotonin whenever sunlight hits your eyes and your skin. And natural light actually helps with several other things, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. In addition to this, being outside increases our happiness levels for two other things that we're going to talk about in just a minute, but vitamin D, and it creates melatonin, or helps your body to produce melatonin at the right time, which improves your sleep. So that's our fourth point, that it corrects our circadian rhythm. So the lumens given off by the sun are exponentially higher. So I'm talking, normally it gives off 11,080 to 18,176 lumens or lux, higher than what is emitted by lights inside. So it's like 112 to 156. What's interesting about this too is talking about our eyesight. If kids are inside, the dimness of the lights also can raise the risk of myopia and cataracts later on in life. So you need to be outside. Even if you're wearing sunglasses in the shade outside, you're still getting more of that light than if you're inside. So that's also interesting. But you need those very dark nights where you're turning off the lights, or you're putting on, you're turning off all the blue lights. So you're putting on maybe those red tinted glasses. You can actually wear those, or you could have a red tinted light inside, or you could just dim your lights and only turn off all the overhead lights, and then try to limit screens. So you need very dark nights, but then you need very light days, which means you need to get outside a little bit, so that you can correct that circadian rhythm so that you go to sleep on time. Because again, you need that light rhythm in order to produce melatonin at the right time. You don't just want to take melatonin willy-nilly because your body will start producing it. You want your body to be producing it on its own. And that means you need to get outside in order to help your body to know when to produce that. So number 5 is that it switches your brain from beta to alpha brainwaves. So our brains, they go into a certain type of brainwave whenever we're outside. And that brainwave is actually important for creative processing. So whenever we look at screens, we can't get into that brainwave. We always stay, it like kicks us back into that beta brainwave. And so, if you look at the show notes, I've linked to several resources that go through the actual research for the things that I'm talking about, if you're interested in it. And you could definitely go down a rabbit hole where you start looking into all these things. But basically, when people view naturally occurring, this is what it says, when people view naturally occurring fractals in nature, so things that you see in nature, again, it increases that alpha brainwave. And so alpha waves are produced when people are relaxed. And again, they're linked to physiological benefits. So it's important for us to get outside. Generally, if you're in like a noisy or polluted area, your brains are going to be doing different things than if you're like walking in a park or walking in nature. And so, yes, if you live in the city, or if that's all you can go to, that's fine. But different things do happen. So just kind of be aware of that if you're around traffic, you're not necessarily getting kicked into those alpha brainwaves maybe as quickly or at all as you could be if you were, off in a park by yourself. So number 6 is it can help you get your daily dose of vitamin D. And this is one that most of us know, but really vitamin D, you're not really able to absorb that from food. So, you could take like vitamin D supplements and stuff, but really it's not as good as if you can just get outside. And so the best thing to do is to just get outside for at least 30 minutes a day, and depending on your skin type and all that kind of stuff, you can wear sunscreen and stuff. A lot of times it's just better to kind of cover up rather than wear sunscreen, because there's also chemicals and things in that too. But to get outside for 30 minutes. And vitamin D is important for bones, blood cells, and your immune system. So it's really important that you get that. Number 7 is that it improves your immune system. So we talked about before the importance of dirt, because microorganisms create serotonin, but also those same microorganisms, they actually make your immune system stronger. It challenges your immune system, but not in the same way that if you go, as a teacher, and whenever it was flu season, your immune system was challenged, but a lot of times it did not win and you just ended up getting sick. So it's a lot different going to, the Children's Museum or a busy zoo with a bunch of kids. That is a very different challenge to your immune system than taking a walk in a park, again, by yourself or just with your family. So your immune system has to be challenged in order to grow stronger. So being able to go out in nature, you'll have a stronger immune system. And people who spend too much time inside actually have a weaker immune system. Number 8 is it leads to a more healthy and active lifestyle. So as you start to think about the time that you spend outside, most of the time is not just spent, staring at a screen, like I've mentioned before. You may, read and relax outside, but a lot of times the way that you would spend your time is gardening, walking, hiking, biking, playing sports. And all of those things that I just mentioned also are good for your health. So it leads just a more healthy and active lifestyle. And again, if you're doing gardening and things like that, then you're growing healthy, good, nutritious food for your family as well, or if you're taking care of livestock. So it can lead to a healthy lifestyle. Number 9 is it improves your short-term memory. So whenever you are in a busy environment, whether that's a city or a room, a school, your workplace, all of these places, they have different things that are competing for your attention. And the more things that compete for your attention, the more that it gives kind of like a mental load. And the more of a mental load you have, the harder it is for you to remember things. So people, they did a study and they said that if they walked for 20 minutes in a natural location, their test scores were 20% higher than people who had spent their time, again, like on a campus or in traffic or something like that. And what they think is because in a natural location, there's not as much distraction from noise pollution and other things like that, traffic, things like that, that it actually reduces the mental load. So it helps your brain to focus, and it probably also gets you in that alpha brainwave where you're relaxed and you're able to be more creative and thoughtful. So it actually improves your short-term memory. So again, if you're working on homework or trying to memorize something or think through things, that's why taking a walk in a park can be so beneficial. It's because it reduces the stress on your mind, not just like the physical stress like your anxiety, but the actual mental load stress that you may have on your mind. And then our last one, number 10, is it increases your longevity. And you could probably look at all of the other benefits that we talked about so far, and you could see why something like getting outside often would increase your longevity because of all the other benefits that we talked about. They did a study and they said that women who lived near parks, lakes, and trees had a lower mortality than those that didn't. And people who if you've watched, there's a documentary on Netflix. He also has a book. He's recorded several podcasts with different people. So you could just look up the name of the documentary, but it's called The Blue Zones. And the people in the blue zones, they also spent quite a bit of time in nature. They walked a lot of places. They still gardened. And being outside, again, increased their longevity, where they're living to, 80 and 90 years old, and they're still active. They're still walking around, gardening at 80 and 90 years old. So as you can see from those 10 different benefits from being outside, there are so many physical benefits that come from just being outside just for a little while each day that will help us to reduce our stress, have better focus. It'll help us be more productive and live a healthier lifestyle overall, a life that is longer overall. So as we think about all of these things, I think it's important then too to think about kind of a bonus benefit, which is the spiritual component. And again, I want us to think about this idea that in our modern world, we're constantly surrounded by all the things that we've created or bought or somehow made ourselves. And everything is human-sized. Our houses are human-sized, our beds, our couches, our cars, the buildings that we make. And there are some things that can be pretty awe-inspiring if you go and you see these huge skyscrapers. But I just think that we navigate our lives where we are constantly feeling like we are in control. But whenever you get outside and you start to look at some of the things that God has created, even looking at a tree, you begin to realize your smallness and perspective to the world as a whole. Whenever you live in your human-sized bubble, then you often think that you have to have it all under control, that you have it all under control, and that can either lead to feelings of pride on one end or anxiety on the other. And that depends on if you actually think you have it in control or if you think that, no, you don't, and everything is going to fall apart. But I think it's important for us to recognize that it's neither, because it's not based on us, it's based on God. And I think us getting outside does that for us. When we go outside, we literally look up and we see the vastness of what God has created, and we're confronted with that. I'm going to read you some verses, but I think we start to see the picture of what nature inspires in people in the scripture. And again, it's something that focuses on the grandeur of nature and the grandeur of its creator. So Romans 1:20 says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities and his eternal power and divine nature have been seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." Psalm 8:3-4 says, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you've set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, the son of man that you care for him?" And then Psalms 121, it says, "I lift my eyes towards the mountains. Where will my help come from?" I think in each of these verses, again, we're confronted with this idea that we are not in control, but we look up to God and we see that he is in control. When we lift our eyes up to God, we are reminded to worship him. And so I think being outside can be a spiritual discipline because it leads us to worship. Spending time in nature leads us to worship. It leads us to realize that we are not in control. We don't need to have it all together. And I think it moves us to worship and to prayer through all of this. And again, it's that prayer of praise where we can trust and find comfort in God. So, knowing all of this, quick caveat, does going outside replace other spiritual disciplines? So, no, the answer is no. I've heard this sometimes, and I think people recognize this because some people I've heard them say, it's like, oh, well, I get more out of going to a park and spending time in nature than I do going to church. And I'm like, okay, I can understand that sometimes it is hard whenever you're having problems in a church, or maybe you're just having problems with God. Like, yes, that can be difficult to want to go to church, but being outside doesn't replace things like Bible reading and scripture memory and meeting with a group of believers. Like, you still need to go and do those things. So really, this would just be, it's like the process of, fasting or of any other spiritual discipline that you do. Yes, being outside can have a spiritual component as well as all of those physical benefits. Understanding all of this, how many hours should you go outside every day? Well, I think the basic number that you should try to remember is you should try to go outside for about 20 minutes a day. So again, if you could combine going outside with your exercise, then there you go, 20 minutes a day. And that is a good amount for getting things like vitamin D and fresh air and resetting your circadian rhythm. But more than that, you can get even more benefits if you add more time outside, because again, it becomes more of a lifestyle change than just saying, okay, this is another thing to check off my list. There was a study by Scientific Reports that recommends spending at least 120 minutes outside a week. So again, if you spread that out over the week, 20 minutes a day kind of gets you to that number. Another person recommended the 25-3 rule, which again is that 20 minutes a day. But then they also say 5 hours in a natural setting each month, like 5 hours in a row, and then 3 days in a kind of like a wild, off-grid kind of camping setting, kind of reset your clock. Charlotte Mason, who is a 19th century educator, I've mentioned her before, and I have a link to some of her ideas on the shop. You could find it in the show notes. but she recommends 4 to 6 hours a day for that preschool age. So I would imagine, especially if you have a preschooler with older kids, you would be getting outside that much too. But she would do everything, eat outside, all that kind of stuff. So 4 to 6 hours a day is one idea. That's kind of like on the furthest side. I've also heard if you do the 1,000 hours outside podcast challenge, which is to get outside 1,000 hours, that equals to about 3 hours a day. The idea behind this is that kids spend between 3 to 6 hours a day. Some kids even spend 9 to 10 hours a day on screens. So she tries to combat that with spending 3 hours outside every day, just doing different kinds of things. So getting kids outside is especially important. The more time you spend outside, the more benefits you get from them. Doing a play date inside is very different than saying, hey, we're going to go to the park and just let kids run around. It's a whole different level of relaxation if you can just let kids play outside. Same thing that the longer you spend outside each day, like gardening or something like that, the more relaxed you feel. So yes, 20 minutes is enough to get some of the physical benefits, but the more time you spend outside, I think the more you are able to really enjoy it. So really, you just have to set the number yourself based on your current lifestyle, but it does get you thinking about it. If you say 20 minutes a day, like everybody really could probably fit that into their schedule. But if I say, hey, try to spend 2 to 3 hours a day and you work from 9 to 5, then really that means like you have to, as soon as you get home, you have to go outside. Or maybe that means you're going to take some of your work, if you're able to do this, not everybody can, but take some of your work and try to go outside during the day, or maybe take your lunch break outside. So trying to get more hours means that you have to start thinking about, okay, where could I actually fit this in? Depending on your job. Like if you work outside, construction or whatever, you might not have to worry about this because you're outside all day, all the time. But for most of us, we have to think about how to add in those outside hours. All right, so what should you do outside? If you are trying to get that time, you'll start to realize it's like, yeah, it's fun just to kind of hang out and relax. But you'll probably start to feel like, okay, well, what else can I do other than just like sitting out in the sun? Well, there's several ideas. One I've heard is to start your morning off like drinking your morning coffee, where you're trying to get daylight on your eyes whenever the sun is coming up, again, to set your circadian rhythm. So before you look at any kind of screen inside, you try to go outside and watch the sunrise. And so that would be an idea of how to get more time. Again, eating outside is a good idea to get more time outside. I saw somebody who actually, they moved their kitchen table, like their dinner table, outside. So they do every single meal outside. I don't know if I'm that committed, but we do have our picnic table or a little glass patio table on our back deck. So sometimes we will go outside and eat out there. But whenever you are looking at some other things that you could do, you could create a natural play area. Again, some of these are for kids. So if you have younger kids, you could do this. But a natural play area with like a mud kitchen, sticks and rocks and things like that. You could garden and grow your own fruits, flowers, and vegetables. You could enjoy and explore the natural area around you by going on nature walks, keep a nature journal, do some watercolors and things from different scenes in nature, explore your local area with your local, state, and national parks, get a good book, read outside, play sports, ride bikes, go for a run, exercise, even work outside. There's so many things to do. So really, whenever you start to think about this, you can end up spending all day outside. If that works with you and your work schedule, you just have to think about, okay, how am I going to make that happen? So the last thing I wanted to give you is some tips and tricks for getting outside more. Now, these are specifically for me as a stay-at-home mom with 2 young kids. This is what's worked for me. So, I'm going to mention my kids and that kind of stuff, but really these tips, you could apply them to your life as well. You just have to say, okay, I'm going to do it for my context. So yes, I might not be looking for the closest playground, but maybe I'm looking for the closest park, or maybe you're into disc golf or pickleball. And so you want to go to the places that they have those things. And that is totally fine. So if you're older, you can still get outside more. You'll just find the things that interest you. So here are my tips and tricks for getting outside more. Now, like I said, I've I do the 1,000 hours outside, but my goal basically is to get outside every day for at least 30 minutes to an hour. If we're out for 1, 2, 3 hours, the more the better. But I at least try to sit outside or get outside for, an hour to 3 hours, something like that. So here are my tips. 1, prepare a spot. So this is like at your house, in your backyard, on your back deck. If you have an apartment, you could still go out and hang out on your back deck, and that would be fine. Or if you have a small fenced-in yard, just create a spot there. We have a little bit more land, and so I would just say create a spot that's like your hangout spot. And so put some chairs. If you have kids, put some toys for them, maybe a table, so that whenever you go outside, there's already a place set up for you, that this is kind of where you hang out. So we have like a little swing, and anytime that we go out just for a few minutes, I can go there. And you can have chalk and different things like that too if you have kids. Second tip, get dressed. So a lot of times I think we think of how we feel inside, and because of kind of the way that, we have this like modern temperature controlled room, we think, okay, well, it's way too cold outside, so I can't go out. Or maybe, in the summertime, it's about to start getting really hot. It's too hot outside. There's no way that I could go out there. But really, there's a quote, and this is so true, that there's no such thing as bad weather. There's only unsuitable clothing. Whenever you are going outside, just dress appropriately. So in the wintertime, that means putting on layers, wearing gloves. In the summertime, it means dressing appropriately with, layers, wearing lighter clothing, things that kind of wick away moisture from you, drinking enough water. But just be prepared for the weather and recognize that you can build up your tolerance to whatever the temperature is. In the wintertime, build up your tolerance to the cold weather. And then in the summertime, build up your tolerance to the hot weather. And you can do that. There's times where you have to use your discretion about when you're going to go outside. If you're in the middle of summer and it's 110 degrees outside, don't go out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You will probably get a heat stroke. But you can go out at, 7, 8, 9 o'clock, and it's not that bad. And then go out at night in the evening. So you just have to pick and choose your hours. In the wintertime, I'm not going out at 7, 8, or 9 o'clock in the morning. But, by 1 o'clock, especially, I live in the South, so, it's 50 degrees. And so by the middle of the day, it feels fine and you can really enjoy it. So it's just important to make sure that you are treating the weather as something that you have to work with. It's not something you can control, but you can definitely use it, work with it, and then you'll be able to enjoy being outside. Next tip is to make a go bag. So basically, by my door, I have a little tote bag that I put in sunscreen. If I have water cups, snacks, I'll put it in there. I have a book that goes in there, a little picnic blanket that has like where it's like moisture wicking on one side and nice and soft on the other. And so make a go bag where you can just throw stuff in. And if you do want to go to a park or even go outside at your house, you can just grab the bag and go. So you're ready to go. And on the same note, keep your car packed with things. I keep some chalk in the back of my car. I keep another picnic blanket in the back of my car. And even right now, I actually have some bikes. My kids are young, so I have the toddler size bikes that just fit in the back of that. So whenever I go places, if I want to go walking, they can just go with me, either in the stroller or they can ride their bikes with me. The next thing is explore. So I firmly believe you should enjoy being at your house and give your kids some of those days where they just have to learn to be bored, because they'll start to learn and problem solve and do so many cool things around your house. But there's some times where you're getting antsy and they're getting antsy. And so if you find yourself just needing a little bit of time to kind of go and do something different, explore the areas around you. There are so many free local, state, and national parks around, even where I live, within a 2-hour radius or something like that you can go and you can find some pretty cool places. And so I made a list of all of the parks that have walking trails, and most of them have playgrounds too. And so just kind of go through, if you do that as like a bucket list for the summer, You could say, okay, every few days or once a week, we're going to go to these places. So it's not an everyday thing. Like, you don't need to feel like you have to go to a playground every day, but it does make you explore and get different things, new things. As you do this, make sure you slow down. So if you get to a playground, don't just say, okay, we got here, you got 5 minutes, and then we're leaving. Try to slow down, sit on a bench, take out a book, let the kids play, let them meet people. And that will really help you to enjoy it and help you, because a lot of times your kids, they don't want to leave. It's you that's saying, okay, all right, we're done. We've been here 10 minutes, time to go on. We have all these other things to do. Instead, just slow down and enjoy the place that you're at. Again, if you've spent, you said, even if you don't have kids and you say, okay, I'm going to go hiking to get out and kind of explore the area around me. And then you go and you're immediately like trying to race to the next thing. You're not really enjoying the time that you have. And again, the whole point of being out in nature is that you enjoy the time in nature and enjoy the benefits that you're getting. So just make sure that you slow down and enjoy the place that you're at right then, because you're going to have to get to the next thing anyway. You don't want to rush and start worrying about it before you have to. All right. 2 more tips. So next one, you get a hobby. So think about some of the things that we talked about doing, whether that's gardening, pickleball, biking, nature journaling. Get a hobby and practice that while you're outside. And that can help you to enjoy those hours and feel like you're growing and learning as you spend time outside. And then lastly, track your time. So like I said, I have a tracker that you can find at the link in the show notes. You can also find it on the shop at AMBL shop. At amorebeautifullifecollective.com. And basically, this is just a way to kind of see your progress. So you could do it one of 2 ways. You could either track the days that you go outside. If you go outside for however long, 5 minutes, 2 hours, whatever, you can mark it off. The other one is that you could say, okay, this is the number of hours I've spent outside. And that can be helpful for if you're trying to hit, 500 hours or 1,000 hours, where you can track the time that you spend outside. So now that we've talked about all of these things, let's review. So we talked about 10 benefits for getting outside, why it's so important. And there's a whole range of physical benefits if you get outside for at least 20 minutes a day. But there's also a spiritual component where being outside helps you remember your place in creation and also God's place in creation as creator of all things. And so it's important to get outside so that we're reminded of him and his majesty. So after we talked about all that, we talked about how long you should get outside. Again, at least 20 minutes, but longer can be better. And then we talked about some tips and tricks for getting outside. So if you enjoy getting outside, you can comment below at the link to the blog post in the show notes. You can also comment below if you're looking at this on YouTube. You can also join the conversation on Instagram or Facebook at amorebeautifullifecollective.com. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, you can subscribe and leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can also check out the resources that we have on our show at amorebeautifullifecollective.com/AMBL shop. Until next week, keep creating a life you love and cultivating your heart for God. Bye. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of A More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. If you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts to help others find the show. While you're there, you can like and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out the blog and our store for more encouragement and resources on how to create a life you love and cultivate your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher, and I'll see you next week.